Okay. Shabbat Shalom to all of you at home who are joining us, and Shabbat Shalom to those here for this, what feels like a special penultimate Shabbat of 2021. And here we are alongside our Christian brothers and sisters in prayer this morning for our Shabbat. We begin our service on page 117, service number 3. So delighted, as I was last night, to share Shabbat with Natasha Kafka, who's leading us in music. So feel free, if you're comfortable, to stand for Matovu as we transform our synagogue into a place of prayer this morning. Your homes, your living rooms, your kitchens, wherever you are, into that place to join us in community. Shalom and welcome. Let's sit down. I wanted to share a blessing that I found, a Jewish blessing for Christmas Day by Rabbi Beth Kalish that I just thought was so beautiful. It's a few years old, but it just kind of reminds us of that tradition that I discussed yesterday before we offer our morning blessings, of the tradition of being invited to offer 100 blessings a day, to feel a sense of gratitude, of awareness of where we are. At the bottom of our page of 117, we say, we thank you, God, for this new day, for morning sun and evening star, for flowering of tree, flowing of tide, for life-giving rains and cooling breezes, for the changing seasons, for the cycle of growth and decay, of life and death. And I'd like to add this sense of where we are in our country, of how we live cheek by jowl, of who we are grateful to. Eternal One, our God, today we express our gratitude for the way this country has embraced our immigrant ancestors and immigrants of other traditions, and for the ways our lives are enriched living in such diverse society. May this service remind us and be a tribute both to our right to be different and to our delight in sharing in other cultures. Baruch atah Adonai, Shomer Yisrael, La'ad. We awake and behold a new day, O God. Renew us unto life. Teach us to recognize your presence in creation. Grateful for your gifts, may we dedicate all our powers to your service. Page 118, as we offer the traditional morning blessings, I invite you to think of your own as we add the blessings of the ability to see, for our bodies to work, to stand up, for the joy of freedom, for our needs being met, for our strength being renewed, and for the blessing of sleep and the privilege of waking to a new day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kufufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa li kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten li ef koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hama'avir shena me'enai utnuma me'afapai. Baruch shama v'haya haolam baruch hu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamchulal b'fi amo meshubach umfa'ar bilshon chasidav v'avadav b'shvachot uvizmorot nagadelcha v'namlichecha malkeinu yachid chei ha'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai melech mechulal v'tishbachot. Top of page 120. From the Piyut of Yehuda Halevi, as soon as I move my hands and feet, I will praise your name. When I go out and when I come in, when I lie down and when I rise up, when I rest on my bed, I will sing your praise. And in the company of my friends, I will praise you with the words of my mouth.
Shabbat tov lehadot la'Adonai ulezameh l'shimcha elyon ulezameh l'shimcha elyon mizmor shir liyom haShabbat tov lehadot la'Adonai ulezameh l'shimcha elyon ulezameh l'shimcha elyon lehagid b'boker chasdecha 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 אמונתך בלילות, עלי יעזור ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון בחינוך. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. כי שמחתני אדוני בפעליך עליך עליך, במעשה ידיך ארנן. השבת טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון ולזמר לשמך עליון ולזמר לשמך עליון.
Beautiful. Sadiq katama yifrach ke'erez balva non yiske shetulim bevet Adonai b'chatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu od yanuvun b'seva deshenin v'rananim yihiyu lahagid ki yasha Adonai tzuri v'lo avlata bo. Let's stand for the Yishtabach if you're comfortable doing so as we head towards the Baruch Hu. Something new that we are bringing in is this notion of sharing the bima, of our skilled lay leaders leading on the bima with me, with our wonderful musicians. And this morning we're so delighted that Beverly, not that it's a family affair this morning, Beverly will be leading us in Shema and her blessings as well as the Amidah. Let's read together the Yishtabach as we move towards the Baruch Hu. Yishtabach Shemcha La'ad Malkeinu, Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol VaHaKadosh B'Shamayim U'Va'aretz. Ki Lacha Na'eh Adonai Eloheinu Ve'Elohei Avotenu. Shir U'Shfacha Halel V'Zimra. Brachot V'Hodaot. Me'ata Va'ad Olam. Baruch Ata Adonai. Haboche B'Shirei Zimra. Page 135.
Top of page 136. Please read with me. We praise you, Eternal One, our God, Sovereign of the universe, Maker of light and Creator of darkness, Author of peace and Creator of all things. In your mercy you give light to the earth and all who live on it, and in your goodness you renew creation continually, day by day. How manifold are your works, O God! With wisdom you have made them all, and the earth world is full of your creations. Your handiwork proclaims your praise. The radiant stars bear witness to your glory. We praise you, O God, Creator of light. Great is your love for us, eternal God, and abundant your compassion. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you taught them the laws of life. So be gracious to us and teach us. Incline our hearts to hear your words, to know and to understand, to learn and teach, and with love to uphold the truths of your Torah. Enlighten us with your teaching, make us faithful to your commandments, and wholehearted in the love and awe of your name. For in love you summon us to serve you and proclaim your unity. We praise you, O God. In love you have called your people Israel to serve you. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, Adonai Echad. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I command you shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them to all your children. You shall talk of them when you're sitting in your house, when you're walking by the way, lying down and getting up. And you shall write them on the doors of your house and upon your gates, upon your gates. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, Adonai Echad.
Please be seated.
למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Good and beautiful and true, sound, established and enduring are these words, now and forever. True it is, Eternal One, that you are our sovereign God and Redeemer, as you were the God and Redeemer of our ancestors. You are our Maker, the rock of our salvation. We have known you always as our helper and our liberator. There is no God but you. Truly, you are the first and you are last. We have no Redeemer but you. You redeemed us from Egypt and freed us from the house of bondage. Then, with great joy, Moses, Miriam, and all Israel together sang to you this song.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדע בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא.
שירה חדשה שיבחו גואלים לשמך על שפת הים. יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו.
אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
If you're able, please stand for the Amida on page 140.
אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. Eternal God, open up my lips that my mouth shall declare your praise. Eternal God, open up my lips, that my mouth shall declare your praise.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elokei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzhak, v'Elokei Yaakov, Elokei Sarah, Elokei Rivka, Elokei Rachel, v'Elokei Leah. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanorah, El Elyon, Gomel Hasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imaot, v'Mevi Go'alav v'Nivnei v'Nehem, L'ma'an Shamo b'Yahava, Melech Ozer u'Mashir Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham v'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor le'alam Adonai, Machayei metim atah Rav l'Choshia, Mashiv haruach u'morid hageshem, Mazriach hashemesh u'morid hatal, Machalkel chayim b'chesed, Machayei metim, Barachamim rabim, Somech noflim v'rofer halim, U'matir asurim, U'mekayem imenato l'shenei afar. Mi chamocha ba'al gevurot, U'mi domelach, Melech memit u'mechayei u'matzmiach Yeshua. V'nenem anata lahachayot meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mahayei hametim. Nekadesh et shemcha ba'olam kashem shemakdishim, Oto b'shmei marom kakatuv al yad neviyecha.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Sabaoth, Malach haaretz kavodo.
Kavodo malei olam.
Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo.
Mimkomcha malkeinu tofiach v'timloch aleinu ki mahokim anachnu lach.
Yimloch Adonai leolam, Elohai yichzion, ledovado, hallelujah. Ledovado, 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 nagid gad lecha, Netzach netzachim, ula netzach netzachim, kedushat chanakdish, ledovado, 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 nagid gad lecha, ula netzach netzachim, ula netzach netzachim, Kedushat Chanakdish. V'shivchacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamush le'olam va'ed. Ki el-melech gadol, ki el-melech gadol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ledovado, 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 nagid gad lecha, ula netzach netzachim, ula netzach netzachim, kedushat chanakdish.
Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Please be seated. We'll continue on page 143 with the Yismachu.
Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, Oneg Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, Oneg Shabbat. Mekadeshei, Mekadeshei Shavi'i Shabbat. Kulam yisba'u, v'yistakhu matu v'chashavat Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shabbat. ובשביעי רסית בו וקידשתו שבת. חמדת ימים אותו קראת שבת. שבת ישמחו במלכותך שומרי שבת וקורא עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי שבת וקורא עונג שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי שבת וקורא עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי שבת וקורא עונג שבת. שבת.
Eloheinu v'lehei avotenu, v'tzei v'nimnuchatenu, k'tzein b'mitzvotecha, v'ten halkeinu b'toratecha, sabeinu b'tuvecha, v'samcheinu b'shuatecha, v'tacheh libeinu l'avtecha be'emet, v'hanhileinu Adonai Eloheinu, b'hava uvratzon Shabbat kodshecha, v'anuchu v'Yisrael mekadshei shemecha, Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu ba'amcha Yisrael, utfilatam ba'ahavat kabel, utchila ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otecha levadecha b'yira na'avod. Modim anachnu lach, she'atah hu Adonai Eloheinu v'lehei avotenu, le'olam va'ed. Sur chayenu, magenu shenu, atah hu ledor vador, nodelacha n'saper tehilatecha, al chayenu hamsirim biadecha, v'al nishmotenu habakudot lach, v'al nisecha shebachol yom imanu, v'al niflotecha v'tovotecha, shebachol eit erev avoche v'tzocharaim. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha, ulacha na'er lahadot.
Shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova. Shalom tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim. V'rachamim. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amecha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha.
As we we go into the silent prayer and we think about the week ahead that has just passed and that we are almost at the end of 2021, I just wanted to share 2 short readings with you to maybe help you think about something during the silent prayer on page 622, 2 of the sayings of the sages. We've just finished reading the Amida, which is a symbolic representation of the sacrifice at the temple we no longer have. So, start with number 25 on that page. Once Ramban Yochanan ben Zakkai was leaving Jerusalem, followed by Rabbi Joshua. When he saw the temple in ruins, "What a disaster for us," said Rabbi Joshua. This place where atonement was made for Israel's sins lies in ruins. But Rabbi Yochanan comforted him. "Do not be distressed, my son, for we have another means of atonement, no less effective, and that is the practice of loving kindness. As it says, 'For I desire loving kindness and not sacrifices.'" And for me, I think that's what makes FPS so special, because there are so many amazing acts of loving kindness that people do for our community and the wider community. And finally, when we were asked to think last night about what we were thankful for this week, and we were all putting things in the chat box, Joseph's final comment was, "We have a lot to be thankful for." So number 24 on this page. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai once said to his disciples, "Go and consider what it is that makes for a good life." Rabbi Eliezer said, "A good eye." Rabbi Joshua said, "A good friend." Rabbi Yossi said, "A good neighbour." Rabbi Simeon said, "Foresight." Rabbi Elazar said, "A good heart." Then he said to them, "I prefer the answer of Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, for his answer includes all of yours."
Imre fi, behegyon libi lefanecha, Adonai sori, Adonai sori, v'go say shalom, shalom, v'rumav, say shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Say shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, amen. Say shalom, shalom, v'rumav, say shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, amen.
Thank you so much. What an important way to end the Amidah, with such reflection that brings the whole year into focus for us. Thank you, Beverly. Let's turn now to the heart of our Shabbat morning service, to our Torah reading, Kriyat HaTorah, page 481. Stand if you are able, ready. 481. Page 481. Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai ve'en kamasecha malchutaha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltaha b'chol dor v'dor. People. Eternal God, bless your people with peace.
Adonai le'amo, Adonai os le'amo yiten. I'm so sorry. Sorry, let me start again. Adonai os le'amo yiten. Adonai os le'amo yiten. Adonai os le'amo yiten. Adonai v'shalom v'shalom.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shamo.
Gadlu l'Adonai iti onoramama shemo yachdav.
Lecha Adonai, Hagedula v'Hagvura v'Hatiferet v'Hanetzach v'Hahod Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Lecha Adonai Hamamlacha v'hamid naseh l'chol l'rosh.
Feel free to sit down as we go into the second book of Torah. I am loving the coincidence or the conflation of us beginning the book of Exodus this morning on the morning of Christmas Day. The story that almost gets retold, again, reflected, what's the word I'm looking at? Rehearsed again with Herod and Jewish baby boys, the story that's being read in churches around us. But for now, this is the story of our Jewish identity, the story that we repeat again and again, the story of rising up over oppression, the story that has been borrowed by so many other peoples as the story of being able to rise up and find yourself. And so in that way, this is the most important Jewish conversation that we have, in a sense, in the whole of Torah. So we begin the book of Shemot today. We begin the book of Shemot, meaning, of course, names in Hebrew, with a list of the names of the tribes of Jacob. Missing for me, of course, is Dinah, the child of Jacob, as well as all these others, these boys who are named. But we do have an extraordinary spotlight. We know that in Torah it is very unusual for women to be named, and when they are named, we know that there is significance there. And of course, this, in the first chapter of the book of Exodus, we have Shifra and Puah, the midwives, the first act of civil disobedience, of social justice, if you like. We hear the story of what happens, the ground setting. I'm not going to say too much, I'm going to speak about it a little later. The setting of a new era for the Hebrews. Whether this is historically accurate or not, this is the story that is our legacy. And just a note and a reminder that for us here, and I know that we have visitors from the States, Rabbi Mary Zamor and her family visiting Norway and coming in as they're in Europe to the service this morning. We welcome you, Mary, and all your family. For us here in Britain, for those that may even remember the speeches of Enoch Powell, Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech takes the language of squirming insects breeding prolifically from, we think, this first description of the Hebrews and their ability to proliferate, to expand, to run and crawl over the land. So bear that in mind as we go into this Torah reading this morning. I'm not sure if we're sharing the Torah reading on screen, but if we're not, we're in chapter 1 of Book of Exodus, verses 1 to 20. Delighted. You can imagine that here on Christmas morning, here in the UK, when the roads are empty, so much so that you could probably skateboard down them, as they do on the motorways in Israel on Yom Kippur, we are a select few, a modest congregation in our sanctuary. And so I couldn't be more delighted that the whole Kafka family are having a go on the bima this morning. So delighted to be calling up Barry, Ya'amod, Shmuel ben Feifel, Levarech et HaTorah. I'm going to put this here, Barry, just to...
Baruch Adonai HaBarach.
Baruch Adonai HaMavorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. Natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. ואלה שמות בני ישראל הבאים מצרימה, את יעקב איש וביתו והוא ראובן, שמעון, לוי ויהודה, יזכר, זבולון ובנימין, דן ונפתלי, גד ואשר. ויהי כל נפש יוצא ירך יעקב 70 נפש, ויוסף היה במצרים וימות יוסף וכל אחיו וכל הדור ההוא ובני ישראל פרו וישרצו וירבו ויעצמו במאוד מאוד. ותמלא הארץ אותם ויקם מלך חדש על מצרים אשר לא ידע את יוסף. ויאמר אל עמו, הנה עם בני ישראל רב ועצום ממנו. הבה ונתחמה לו פן ירבה, והיה כי תקרנה מלחמה, ונוסף גם הוא על שונאינו, ונלחם בנו, ועלה מן הארץ. וישימו אליו שרי מיסים, למען ענותו בסבלות, ויבן ערי מסכנות לפרעה את פיתום ואת רמסס. וכאשר יענו אותו, כן ירבה וכן יפרץ, ויקצו מפני בני ישראל, ויעבדו מצרים את בני ישראל בפרך, וימררו את חייהם בעבודה קשה, בחמור ובלבנים, ובכל עבודה בשדה את כל עבודתם אשר עבדו בהם בפרך. ויאמר מלך מצרים למילדות העבריות, אשר שם האחת שפרה ושם השנית פועה. ויאמר בילדכן את עבריות, וריתן על האבנים, אם בן הוא והמיתן אותו, ואם בת היא והיה, ותראנה המילדת את האלוהים, ולא עשו כאשר דיבר אלוהיהן מלך מצרים, ותחיינה את הילדים, ויקרא מלך מצרים למילדות, ויאמר להן, מדוע עשיתן הדבר הזה, ותחיינה את הילדים, ותאמרנה המילדות את פרעה, כי לא כנשים המצרים והבריות, כי חיות הנה. בטרם תבוא עליהם המילדת וילדו, ויתב אלוהים למילדות, וירב העם, ויעצמו מאוד, ויהי כי יראו המילדות את האלוהים, ויעש להם ביתים, ויצאו פרעה לכל עמו לאמור, כל הבן הילבד הירא תשלחו וכל הבת תהנה. וילך איש מבית, no, let me stop there. תשלחו וכל הבת תהנה. So it was. These are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt, who came with Jacob and all his household, who came with him, his children, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And so they were, each soul that came forth from Jacob's loins, 70 souls in all. And Joseph was already in Egypt. And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and the whole of that generation with him. And the children of Israel continued to proliferate, to grow, to be fertile, to fill the land, to almost crawl around upon the land, to grow mighty and to increase in their numbers greatly, so that the land was full of them. And the king of Egypt rose up, and it was a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph anymore. Meaning, of course, who knew no longer or was bothered to know about the history of Joseph and the Hebrews in Egypt. And the king said to his people, behold, the Israelite clan is great and numerous, possibly greater and more numerous than us. So therefore, let us deal wisely with them, lest they overtake us and become greater than us, and call out a war on us, and gather together with those that hate us, with our enemies, and declare war over us, and rise up above the land, or even force us out of the land. And so they, the Egyptians, placed taskmasters over the Hebrews in order to oppress them greatly. And they built for the Egyptians storehouses, cities of storehouses for Pharaoh, like Pithom and Ramesses. And however, the more that they were oppressed, the more they grew and increased in the land. And the words literally are the words almost that we use for diaspora, of spreading out over the land. So the children of Israel spread. And the people of Israel oppressed them with great labor, with hard labor, and made their lives very bitter with hard labor of clay and bricks, and hard labor in the fields. And whatever they did, it was hard labor. I love a modern midrashic way of reading this story that Rabbi Louis Jacob, Zichrono Livracha, used to say that the hardness of the labor was that those who were able to work were not given enough work, and those who were unable were given too much. Such was the nature of the hard labor and the oppression, was that people were not matched up with their abilities. And the king of Egypt called to speak to the midwives for the Hebrew women, we don't know, and there is much response to, were these midwives actually Hebrews themselves, or were they attached to the Hebrew women? And the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the second was Puah. And he said to them, when you attend, literally on the birthing stools, and you attend to their births, and when you see a boy is born, a son is born, you should kill him. And if it's a daughter, you can let her live. And the Hebrew women the midwives saw or were aware of God and did not do what they had been told to do by the king of Egypt, and they let the children live. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing? Why have you allowed the children to live? And they answered rather cleverly and cannily, saying, I'm presuming they're saying, my lord. The midwives answer, my lord, the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are much more, they are much quicker, they are much fuller of life, really. And basically, almost before the midwife has been called, they have given birth. And God made things good for the midwives when God saw what they had done. Made things good for them, made things go their way, expanded what they had and the homes that they had, so that they did well. And the children of Israel continued to expand and to grow, and and boys and girls got past the midwives so that they were able to live. But the boys obviously were still being looked for, and the girls were allowed to live.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan לנו Torah emet v'chayei olam natayei batochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeshua Koach. Let's stand for the raising of the scroll.
Baruch shenata Torah le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato.
Let's roll the scroll as we go towards the Haftarah, and I'll make space for you, Iris, to come up to read the Haftarah. Just give me a moment, Justin, and I'll step back. So the Haftarah, we see that there is a tiny typo on the screen for those of you at home. The Haftarah comes from chapter 27 of the book of Isaiah. We can see the reflection, the echoing of the tribes of Israel, and that things will eventually go well for them as Isaiah prophesies. This side.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzor kol haolamim, tzadik b'kol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'oseh, ha'medaber v'mekayem, shekol divarav emet v'tzedek. Isaiah 27, 6-13. Jacob shall come to take root. Israel shall blossom and bloom. They shall fill the earth with fruit like a medlar when it sends forth runners. Medlar is an apple tree. Did God strike Israel down like others who were struck? Was Israel slain as God slew the slayers? God contended with them, sending them off with a hot blast, as on the day the east wind comes. See now, thus shall Jacob's sin be atoned, and this will be the result of removing its guilt when they grind all their altar stones into powdered limestone, when none of the sacred pots and incense altars are left standing. The fortified city is empty, its homes deserted, forsaken like a wilderness. There calves graze, and there lie down and consume the branches of the trees. And when the crown withers, they crack. Women come and use them to kindle fires. Since this people has no understanding, their Maker will show them no pity. Their Creator will show them no mercy. But there will come a day when, from the river Euphrates to Egypt's Nile, God will beat out the peoples like grain, and you will be picked up one by one, O people of Israel. And on that day, a great shofar shall be sounded. Those lost in Assyria, those bound to Egypt shall come back and worship the Eternal on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. Oh, shall I say the bracha as well? Okay. Baruch atah. We're going for lesson before. And I'll go to this one, yes. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol ha'olamim, tzadik b'kol ha'dorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman, ha'omer v'oseh, ha'medaber v'mekayem, shekol divarav emet v'tzedek. Actually, I said, yes, I said that one first instead of that one.
Don't worry,
Sorry.
it's very similar.
Okay.
Do you want to do
Shall
that?
we do this one as well?
Yes.
I'll do this one in English. For the Torah, for the privilege of worship, for the prophets, for this Sabbath day, which you, Eternal One, have given us for holiness and rest, for honor and beauty, we thank and praise you, O Eternal One, our God. May all the living praise your name now and forever. We praise you, O God, for the holiness of the Sabbath.
Thank you, Iris. Let's stand for a prayer for our congregation, which David will share with us.
Eternal God, we ask your blessing on our Queen Elizabeth and all the royal family, as well as those who govern our country. Guide them and all who govern with a spirit of wisdom and compassion, so that they care for the citizens and the stranger, and bring benefit to all the inhabitants of our land and the world. Bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel. Bless our congregation and all its members. Be with those who will seek your presence and all those who are in need of healing, spiritual or physical. Let them know that you are near to comfort and sustain them. May peace exist in the state of Israel soon and in our time. May you, eternal God, grant blessing to her, established as an age-old dream and home to the oppressed. May its leaders and citizens be inspired with a faithfulness to the aims of its founders, and may the country be imbued with the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice always. May this Shabbat renew our energy to build and to sustain a better world, and to deepen our gratitude of so much that surround us. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Amen. On this day, for us as British citizens, nearing the end of the year, just reminding us of the importance of the gift we have of this coexistence that we are proud of here, no more so than today. We're on page 486. Yehalelu et Shem Adonai ki nizgav shemo levado.
Hodo al eretz v'shamayim, yabarem kerem leyamo, tehila lechol hasidav, livnei Yisrael, am karovom.
Behold, a good doctrine has been given you. Do not forsake it. It is a tree of life to those who hold it fast, and all who cling to it find happiness. The words above are up. Eitz Chaim hi lemachazikim ba.
Eitz Chaim hi למען כזיקים בה, ותומכך משרושה דרכיך, דרכי נועם, בכל נתיבותיך שלום. השיבנו השם אליך, ונשובה חדי שמנו, חדי שמנו, ימינו כקדם.
So a new king arose in Egypt who knew not Joseph. How can we not consider the history of our relationships in the diaspora today of all days? As we gather here in synagogue, perhaps some of us have turkeys in our ovens, and unusually less security on our gates, knowing that the Community Security Trust thinks we are more relaxed in our synagogue than many, but we are willing to work at it and understand our place in our wider community. But a new king arose who knew not Joseph allows us to consider, how do we live here? What is our comfort? What our integration? What our difficulty? I'd say that both Christmas and the portion of Shemot, the beginning of Exodus, focuses that gaze for us. Looking back at our history here within the liberal movement of two highly integrated British traditional Jews along with an American rabbi creating what is now the legacy of our liberal Judaism, and yet knowing so well the rules and the context of this British life that we share now. So looking further back at our emancipation as Jews from Europe brings with it an interesting context for us to consider today, this morning of the 25th of December. In 1806, Napoleon convened, we're told, a Sanhedrin of 120 Jewish lay and rabbinic notables, asking them to respond to the 12 questions, amongst which was, are you Jews willing to be part of France? Willing to go to war against Jews who come from different countries? are French Jews going to fight German Jews? He asked, would you dissolve rabbinic authority? In short, he was telling the dreamers of emancipation, if you want to join the French nation, if you want to have equal rights, liberty, fraternity, and equality, the right to vote and bear arms, you must surrender your right to be a separate nation. And that was the way the Friends of the Jewish People argued for the emancipation of the Jews, expressed by and to Count Clermont de Tonnerre. To the Jew as an individual, we'll grant everything. To the Jew as a group, we grant nothing. How things have moved on since then. But back then, the Jews understood there was a silent contract, a kind of trade-off for the privilege of entering a neutral society, the public square being a neutral space, for schools to be neutral, states to be neutral, and this neutrality calling for a separation between an identity of the Jew as a Jew at home and in the public universe where they lived. How then would a Jew know they were Jewish? Well, you will know you are Jewish was suggested to them, because in the private domain of your home, you'll be able to express your unique religiosity. Yehuda Gordon advocated the split, be a Jew at home and a human being in the street. And I wonder, where are we now in how we express our Judaism and the lives we have led as Jews in the street and at home? People think of us as a people, as a Jewish people, being 3,000 years old, perhaps. But in terms of the new infrastructure, in terms of the political and cultural life we Jews lead in the diaspora, and of course the state of Israel is even younger than that, we Jews are probably only around 200 years old. We are a new old people who've lived in a society that's become really a Gentile society. A revealing anecdote that I learned only this week is told about three people: the Marquis of d'Argens, a Catholic, the Protestant King Frederick the Great, and the Jew Moses Mendelssohn. In the 18th century, Jews were not allowed to live in certain areas of the country, of Germany. Jews couldn't live, for example, in Berlin. But the Marquis appealed to King Frederick to issue a ruling that would allow Moses Mendelssohn to live in Berlin. He wrote a letter declaring an intellectual who was a bad Catholic appeals to an intellectual who was a bad Protestant to allow an intellectual who was a bad Jew to live in Berlin. The idea was that the commonality amongst Protestants, Catholics, and Jews was something universal, namely reason, that everyone shared. Everyone was an intellectual, everyone could use their minds, and whether they were bad Catholics, bad Jews, or bad Protestants, they were allowed to be together and share that. So the public square, we understand, has at times been secularized, kept folk safe from religious divisiveness. But that has not always been the case, even in these last 200 years. We know the tragedies of last century, and even this one, have been disconcerting for all religions, and we have our own tragedy to carry, and even watch now the rise of extremism. The public square is not necessarily any longer neutral or safe. There are, in my mind, constant new kings arising who did not know Joseph. So I won't follow Enoch Powell, who I've already mentioned, famously using the insect life descriptions of the proliferation of Jews in his River of Blood speech. We won't rest with the idea of where we are in diaspora Jewry, of how we exist alongside, of what our need for security at our gates, of how we are considered by the wider Jewish community and the Community Security Trust, who thinks we are not careful enough, and we are listening to them now. We won't finish there today, because today is also an opportunity to see how we are all connected. This Shabbat of Christmas gives us pause to consider its meaning and ours bound up with it, of who we are here in this country that we make our home. Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, a rabbi, an American rabbi who I much admire because of the book that he wrote, putting God on the guest list for B'nai Mitzvah, thinking of a spiritual way to imbue those ceremonies that have become so ubiquitous for our children. He wrote in 2014 a wonderful sermon where he imagined his seasonal fantasy was a Christian clergy colleague calling him up from the local airport, from an airport somewhere where they had been stranded, saying, "I can't get back to my church for Christmas. Please, will you give the sermon?" And Rabbi Salkin always returns to this fantasy, he said, imagining what he would preach and say in a church on Christmas Day. He notes that whilst we are enjoying, at times, not his words, the secular town square, the attractiveness of Christmas for Salkin, and I think for many of us who really understand true religious Christianity, it's true, the attractiveness of Christmas, its true spirit and message is unequivocally one of incarnation. Let's cut to the chase, Salkin wrote. This season is not about reindeers or gifts or trees. This season is not about wreaths or jingle bells or Santa. This season is not just about peace on earth or goodwill to men and women. Nor is it really just about the birth of Jesus or about the coming of the Christian Messiah. Christmas actually celebrates the idea of incarnation. Christmas claims that God was incarnated as a Jewish child, born to, importantly, refugee parents in a manger in Bethlehem. And because of this child, God was no longer aloof from the world. The child, as we know, grew up to wander the countryside to teach. He gathered disciples. He becomes an itinerant preacher. Sometimes his message will have very Jewish resonances. Sometimes it seems to have been at odds with what we know Judaism to have been, and indeed to have become. But in the mind of the Christian community, this child becomes a shortlist, a new Adam, father of creation, another Noah's Ark, redeeming humanity from the waters of sin, a new Abraham, father to a new people, another Isaac, a new sacrificial offering, a new Jacob's ladder linking heaven and earth, another Joseph sold for silver, cast into the pit, raised up again, possibly a new Moses, being a lawgiver, liberator, maybe an Aaron, a new Aaron, becoming a new priest of the people, a new David, founder of a new kingdom, and a descendant of David, we know, because he is seen as the Messiah, the Son of God, God incarnate. Because of this child, Christianity teaches God is no longer aloof from the world. God doesn't dwell in some distant or inaccessible region. God comes into the world. God chooses to be present in the world. God is born in human form to share the pains and aspirations of human beings. In the words of the Christian novelist Friedrich Buchner, if you don't hear in the message of Christmas something that must strike some as blasphemy and others as sheer fantasy, the chances are you haven't heard the message for what it is. Emmanuel, God is in and with us. So Salkin really set me a challenge to think of my Christian clergy and the message of fellow Christians of what they are wrestling with and what message it can have for us, their neighboring Jews. We Jews do have difficulty understanding it, but to be fair, most Christians also do. When the impossible happens, the incarnate God, the one of whom we sing in Yigdal, Ein lo damut haguf ve'ein lo guf, he has neither a likeness of body nor a body. This is a God who we in Judaism and in traditional Judaism says is impossible for us to understand. As the prophet Isaiah says, your ways are not my ways, your thoughts are not mine. This God that Christianity teaches at this time of Christmas, important for us to understand, is a God that is now human, captured In The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, by the character Shug, I believe God is everything, everything that is or ever was or ever will be, and when you can feel that and be happy to feel it, you know you found it. So we might understand the frustration and even sadness of serious Christians in bemoaning what the Christian season has become, that the star of Christmas is no longer the child in the manger, rather a secularized version of that 4th century bishop St. Nicholas, who's now incarnated 10,000-fold at every high street and shopping centre, bringing joy. That is true. I look to David, who acts as one, but nonetheless, the shops have become the season's holy of holies, material excess celebrating the birth of one who cast his lot with the poor and warned against the temptations of riches. So what is our Jewish response to the theology of this season? What is it for us to understand? Do we have any parallel of understanding this deep theology that permeates Christmas, and for us to consider it as Jews in the diaspora alongside Christians? Jews do believe that God can't become human, that humans cannot become God. But sometimes we do transcend that distance through prayer, through gathering as a community as we are now, through the study of sacred texts, and through the loving acts that we as a congregation often do, as Beverly mentioned. Could it be that Jews, for whom the idea of incarnation is an anathema, actually end up benefiting from something akin to it with our engagement with Torah and the stories of Torah and how we empathize with each other through Torah? The Torah scroll contains the 5 books of Moses, central focus of Jewish worship. Even those of us who doubt that Torah is the literal word of God will concede there is something godly in the scroll, the record of the human attempt to relate to God, the first and most powerful Jewish conversation with God. Here we are beginning the 2nd book, arguably the most important story of our collective identity, the most important Jewish conversation. And maybe that's why we Jews treat Torah with such reverence. It's why we bury our scrolls as we might bury a person. It's why we fast or donate to charity if we accidentally drop the Torah scroll. It's why Jewish parents cry, and Jeffrey Salkin knows this best of all from his observation of B'nai Mitzvah. It's why we Jewish parents cry when our children clutch the Torah scroll at bar and bat mitzvah. And maybe it's why the Nazis took such savage glee in desecrating Torah scrolls. In a profound way, was it their attempt to eradicate the image of God in the world for us Jews? In a powerful mystical sense, is the Torah, the scroll and everything that is in it, the incarnation of godliness for us as Jews, symbolizing and capturing a divine conversation? The great prolific scholar of rabbinic Judaism, Jacob Neusner, noticed, as Salkin drew my attention to, this reality to be particularly true with regard to the ancient rabbis and sages, as Beverly, not knowing what I was going to speak about, read for us today. In the Talmudic sage, he wrote, "The word of God was made flesh. Out of the union of human beings and Torah was born the rabbi, the person who imbibed all that was in Jewish tradition, interpreted and taught it." But not only rabbinic sages can embody Torah, anyone can embody Torah with our engagement with Torah, with this moment of us reading Torah every Shabbat moment. Does this become our incarnation of godliness? So inspired by Jeffrey Salkin, inspired by this moment of being in synagogue this Shabbat morning, of thinking what religious Christians are attempting to understand this morning, of us as we understand our place in the world, here in the diaspora, here in Britain, consider the following story told by Elie Wiesel. A group of Jews in the barracks at Auschwitz wanted to celebrate Simchat Torah, but obviously they lacked a Torah scroll. At which point, wrote Wiesel, an old man asked a 9-year-old boy, "Do you remember what you learned in Cheder, what you learned in your synagogue?" "Well, yes, I do," replied the boy tentatively. "Really? You remember Shema Yisrael?" "Oh, I remember even more," said the boy with a bit more confidence. "Shema Yisrael is enough," said the old man, and with that he lifted the boy from the ground and began dancing with him as though he were the Torah. Never before, Wiesel wrote later, never before had Jews celebrated Simchat Torah with such fervor. So maybe we Jews do understand the idea of incarnation, the meaning of living alongside each other, holding difference and yet being warm to them, of diaspora life, of our place within it this weekend of all weekends, while Christmas is shared by the secular Jews or everyone. Maybe the true message is one for us to remember with empathy, to understand. Maybe that is our Christmas learning this Shabbat morning, one of empathy and understanding. We all heard that this is the second year of a Bethlehem with no pilgrims, of religious shops with no customers the last 24 months, with a meager, small, sad procession to honor Christmas and that precious birth for all the Christians associated with it. But this morning, let us have a brief respite from the intense and at times difficult newsfeed, a moment to consider who we Jews are, where we are in the context of our wider community. And I would hazard a guess that those of us who choose to be here this morning want to wrestle with the theology and the idea of faith that we all share, but that we can have an understanding for beyond us. Shabbat Shalom. So, as we think of ourselves this morning as Jews, think of the world that we hope to inhabit. Let us go to Aleinu. Last night I shared some pithy words of the writer Joan Didion that died, and who I think captured so much of the wrestling of life, and many of us have read her words. And I think of the Jewish conversation that we read this morning of the beginning of the book of Exodus. And Joan Didion writing in her book, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, character, the willingness to accept responsibility for one's own life, is the source from which self-respect springs. Let's take that idea with us as we go towards Aleinu on page 520.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, אשר שם מלכנו לייחד את שמו, וגור עלינו להמליך מלכותו. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגופי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד.
Let's read together. Trusting in you, eternal God, we hope soon to behold the glory of your might, when false gods will vanish from our hearts and idolatry cease forever. Help us to perfect the world by bringing it under your unchallenged rule, when all will invoke your name, relinquish evil, and turn to you alone. May all who dwell on earth come to know that to you every knee must bend and every tongue swear loyalty. Before you let them humble themselves, and to your glorious name let them give honor. Let all submit to your sovereign rule. May that time come soon and last forever. For ultimate sovereignty is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory. As it is written, the Eternal One shall reign forever. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Let's turn to Kaddish and to those who are mourning and marking a yahrzeit at this time. We think particularly of Martin Boyd, husband of Valerie Boyd Hellner, of Helga Brady, aunt of Neil Rosenweb, of Philip Colby, father of Richard Colby, of Faye Furman, grandmother of Beverly Kafka, of Ernest Greenfield, father of Gordon Greenfield, of Annie Harris, mother of Ruth Hoffman, of Harold Hellner, brother of Rabbi Frank Hellner, of Karen Labworth, sister of Roger Lyons, of Vicky Lloyd, mother of Annabel Ballant Curti, of Henry Meyer, husband of Vera and father of Paul, of Thomas Touts, brother of Patricia Hinson, and of Arnold Urbach, father of Leslie Urbach. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing, and may those who remember and recall their loved ones be comforted in their loss, as we say the words of the Kaddish with them. Yitkadash v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, bi'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'hayachon u'v'yom echon, u'v'chayei dochol Beit Yisrael, Magalav v'tzman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam ome'al maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'a v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithada v'yitale v'talal k'shemei dekudesha brichu. Leila min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechemata. Da'amiram v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shamaya. V'hayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav. Hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'al kol b'nei Adam. V'imru amen. Let's sit down as we prepare to end our service. And Kiddush will come round on little plates under your chair for us to end the service together with Kiddush. But let us end our service with Adon Olam.
Yes, I'm going to play Adon Olam, but since it happens to be the 25th of December, and I think something special on that day happens, I've got a little tune that you may recognise, and I hope you like it. Adon Olam, Hashem alach, b'terem kol, yitzin ivra, v'yein asa, v'chefzer chol azai melech, shemo nikra, Adon Olam, v'yacharei, kichlot hakol, levado, yimloch nora, haya v'hu hover v'hu yigeh v'tifara Adon Olam Shabbat Shalom everyone v'hu echad v'yein sheni lacham shelo l'chachbira b'li reishi b'li tachli b'lo ha'oz v'hamizra v'hu ali v'chai go'ali חורב לי בעת צרה והוא נשיא ומנוס לי מנד כזי ביום אחד ביד הקיד רוחי בעת אישה
Kolakavod, Natasha. Fantastic. Let's stand for Kiddush for us. Natasha, I'm going to give you this to lead us just out of the Shamru. Any Shamru. And I'll join you, just so you've got one.
Thank you. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam B'nei Ruben, B'nei Yisrael Ot hi le'olam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Uv'yom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash Shabbat vayinafash V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen Amen.
L'chaim. We really should have had port this morning. That was an oversight, right? Oh, yeah. But not in the synagogue, we don't. We really need to change. I think, maybe we should stretch to port now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. B'te'avon. You were going to have mince pies or little German gingerbread biscuits until we discovered they were very non-kosher. So that's why you've got a chocolate finger on your plate to mark today before we leave each other. So Shabbat Shalom to all of you at home. So lovely to welcome you. Mary, lovely to welcome you and your family. I think you're visiting Norway, hence we get you in the European hemisphere. So really nice to have you. And all of us in the sanctuary, it really was more and more of you came in during
I don't know what's happened.
I think you muted it.
Yeah, if I somehow muted everyone. Don't know what I've done.